Welcome to the Candice Malcolm Show. My name is Kris Sims. I'm the Alberta Director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, sitting in Candice's chair for today's show. Thank you so much for making us a part of your day. As always, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel and share it with your friends. We have got an outstanding show for you today. I'm really looking forward to it. And oh my goodness, did the pipeline fight just get stepped up? Okay. So here's what's happening. We all know that Alberta Premier Danielle Smith has been fighting like a badger, okay, to get some of these federal laws repealed, which are strangling Alberta's oil and gas sector, our natural resources here in Alberta. So she's been saying, hey man, you got to get rid of Bill C-69, which is typically known as the No More Pipelines Act. You have to get rid of the energy cap on our oil and gas production. Ottawa tries to call it an emissions cap. It's a production cap. Even the PBO says this is going to blow like tens of billions of dollars out of our economy. So get rid of that. You have to get rid of the West Coast tanker ban. Basically, give us access and the ability to sell our stuff on the world market. Take your boot off our neck. So she's been saying so firmly but politely for a long time. This was really interesting what she just did yesterday. So remember when Prime Minister Mark Carney made this big announcement of this like nation building office? Okay, that sounded really neat. He was talking about fast tracking approvals for things like pipelines and for things like, frankly, mines in Northern Ontario in the so-called Ring of Fire, which is full of minerals and elements that are super valuable and would help the entire Canadian economy. So it was the nation building office. The problem with government is that they're really good at setting up panels and committees and new offices and slapping a new label on their lectern, but they're not so good on actually doing stuff. In Carney's case, all he needs to do is get out of the way. He just needs to repeal those laws I just mentioned. But something interesting happened yesterday. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith said, okay, so there's no private company, okay? There's no private oil company or pipeline company that is stepping up to the podium right now saying, I'm willing to risk my investors' money on this project. Okay, I'm going to trust Ottawa again, even though they've betrayed our trust for 10 straight years. Kind of hard to blame them for that because they're not super enthusiastic about losing money. So Smith looked around and she said, okay, what if Alberta, the province, is the applicant? What if Alberta, the province, is the one that is saying to this brand new nation building federal office of speedy approvals, okay, approve this. So she made her announcement yesterday. Listen to this.
I will continue, as I said, to work to build the coalition of partners who are going to be on board with this. But this is a Canada project, and this is a test of whether Canada works as a country. Because if we can't build with collaboration of the federal government and between provinces, if it's everybody gets to get their products going to market except Alberta, that's not a country. A country is one where we support each other.
Do you hear that? The key part of what she just said there was, this is a test. Yes, it is. Because what's Mark Carney going to do when Alberta files all of its paperwork and starts speaking with First Nations along the proposed pipeline route? Basically, what the Alberta government is doing here is saying, you know, all those hoops you have to jump through and red tape and regulations and forms you have to fill out, all of the busy work of government, we'll do that. Frankly, that's what provinces do anyway. Whenever they're challenging something Ottawa is doing that's stupid in their view, they have to go through these processes anyway. So to be fair, they are spending taxpayers' money on this process. I think it's about $14 million with an M. I was nervous about hearing about this at first because I was like, what are you doing? We don't want taxpayers on the hook for building a pipeline. Smith, to be clear, said that's not what we're doing. Taxpayers are not going to be on the hook for building a pipeline because we've experienced that before with Kinder Morgan that walked away, and now we have Trans Mountain built at like $30 billion bill for taxpayers. So very interesting chess move here. We have to wait and see what Carney's going to do. But first, hey, wait a minute. There's a guy that's a lot closer than Carney. What's British Columbia Premier David Eby saying before we roll the tape? Remember that during the election, there was a whole different tone change coming out of British Columbia. It's like, oh, we could be open to nation building projects. Oh, this could be a maybe. It was definitely a tone change. Don't know why he said all that stuff, because listen to this.
To put that tanker ban at threat, it's not just a threat to our pristine coast that so many British Columbians, including myself, value, but it is a direct economic threat to the kind of economy that we're trying to build in the country here. And so when I've said, let's cross that bridge when we come to it, we'll see what the Premier comes up with, I'm being polite. I am being polite. There is no project. There is no bridge to cross unless the Albertan government and the federal Canadian government are committing billions of taxpayer dollars to build this project. And if that is the plan, then they should be transparent about it. Don't mistake my politeness for weakness on protecting our economy and our coast.
Okay, a few things here. I'm going to be polite. Okay. Protecting our economy. The NDP government in British Columbia, which has been in power since 2017, has more than doubled the provincial debt of British Columbia. Their debt is costing British Columbians more than $5 billion this year, just on the interest payments on that thing. So he shouldn't say the word economy and protection in the same sentence unless he's going to do a full-scale change. On the issue of the pristine coast, okay, I grew up in British Columbia. I grew up on the West Coast. I have literally swum with salmon and hugged trees on Vancouver Island. So I get it. But what exactly does he mean by shipping off of the pristine BC coast? Just in case people don't know, Vancouver and Surrey, and just south in Delta, where you see the Tsawwassen Ferry go across to Victoria all the time, there's a whole lot of stuff being shipped out of that port every single day. All sorts of things that would, God forbid, if there was a spill, would cause a major environmental problem. That is what happens in a busy port city and a busy economy. Now, there are precautions that can be taken. I'm hearing from people that are saying that there can be double-hulled ships, that there can be spotters that go ahead of the ships, the barges and the tankers with smaller ships, warning whales, all this stuff, okay? I will also gently point out, BC Ferries crosses that strait all the time. Collisions with wildlife do happen, and it's super upsetting, but they don't shut down BC Ferries. Maybe I shouldn't give them ideas. Okay, so we've covered off what Premier Smith is saying. So she's ready to rumble. I find it really interesting that she called this a test, so we'll have to wait and see. We've seen what David Eby is saying. Sounds like he's not in favor of having what would essentially be like the Northern Gateway Pipeline, if people remember that, and having tankers of oil and gas product coming out of the northern BC area. So we've heard from them. What about the feds? Well, we haven't heard from Prime Minister Mark Carney in a direct response yet, but opposition Pierre Poilievre was just asked about this. Let's hear what he has to say.
There's one man who stands in the way of this pipeline getting built. It's Mark Carney. If the Liberals want it built, they will immediately repeal the tanker ban so the pipe can fill a ship that goes abroad, the production cap so that our producers can make enough oil to go in the pipe, and C-69 so that the pipe can get rapidly approved. Mark Carney really only has to do one thing. Get out of the way.
It's true. And it's something that those of us who value the natural resources industry have been saying now for a decade. And just let me explain the taxpayer angle on this, okay? So, for example, I'll give you one example with a pipeline, okay? So, back years ago, people might remember the company Kinder Morgan. It is a private company. It owned a pipeline that already existed. It was built in the 1950s. That runs from Edmonton through the Rockies, across BC, and out to Burnaby, okay, which is a city that's part of the Greater Vancouver Regional District. There it was, okay? It was there for decades. Kinder Morgan said, hey, we're seeing a lot of oil and gas product coming out of Edmonton, coming out of Alberta. We want to be able to ship more, but we don't have the capacity. We're going to twin our own pipeline. So same route. It's this little mode area in the woods generally, okay? We're going to just twin this. They got green lights at first, but so much foot dragging. It dragged on and on and on between the NDP government in Victoria and the newly minted Justin Trudeau government in Ottawa. It just basically hemorrhaged money this entire time without putting a shovel in the ground. So the private company basically threw its hands up and said, you know what, we can't do business here. We can't do this anymore. And so the Trudeau government stepped in and it's like, oh, we're going to be the hero here. Let's buy the existing pipeline and build the second one on taxpayer dime. It was a terrible thing to do, and it wound up costing us like $30 billion. So that gives you an example of the difference here. That Kinder Morgan pipeline alone, just its private property taxes that it has to pay, okay, into the Greater Vancouver Regional District because it exists through that area, that apparently was enough money to cover its garbage and recycling collection. That's just property taxes. The amount of money that would have been taken in by the government, okay, through income taxes, okay, alone would have been billions of dollars if we had full proper pipeline capacity in this country. In fact, there's even economists who have done the math. They've said for the past 10 years, since 2015, Canada has lost out on approximately $600 billion because of strangled and stalled natural resources projects. So that includes things like pipelines, mines, that big infrastructure stuff for natural resources. So this is why we are seeing investors saying we can't do business here. That's why this test of the system of the new nation building office that Alberta is doing here is super important. Where do we go from here? What are the feds going to do about this? Let's find out. Joining me now is Brian Lilley. He is the senior columnist with the Toronto Sun newspaper chain. He is stationed in Toronto. He's also the host of a great podcast here. It's called Full Comment. Okay? Look for the orange square with the mouth thing around it. And I use him as my interpreter. Brian, you are my go-between between what I would call independent media and more mainstream media. And you also get heavy hitters on. I was listening to your experts that were talking about urban warfare.
Yeah, John Spencer and Richard Kemp, that was a great episode. And I say it was a great episode, not because I had much to say, but because I had these two really smart guys on, a British Army officer, retired, American Army officer, retired. And we talked all about Gaza, the war there, what it's like doing urban warfare, and debunked a lot of the myths that have been going on. So I appreciate your support as always, Kris.
Great guests make good shows, Brian. I wanted to get your response to a move that Premier Smith made yesterday. Now, I will admit, leading up to it, I was hearing rumors of, oh, they're going to pay to build a pipeline with taxpayers' money, or there's going to be some weird Crown Corp. And I was getting kind of nervous about it. And then the move that she made, I thought was pretty darn interesting, pretty smart. So go ahead.
It's hard to speak out against this. If she announced, hey, we're going to, start the Alberta Pipeline Corporation and taxpayers are going to pay for it, I would, no, that's not a good idea. But, we have faced 2 decades of opposition to pipelines that is irrational, in my view. And you and I spent a lot of time talking about this over the years. We have talked about Northern Gateway, about Keystone XL, Trans Mountain, Energy East. We've talked about all of them and the irrational opposition to them. So what is she proposing? Spend $14 million, partner with industry, including those in the oil and gas industry, the pipeline industry, partner with Indigenous groups, and let's start doing the preliminary planning work. This has to be done anyway. Somebody has to do it. And the knock that Liberals keep using is, well, of course, there's no pipeline on our list of major projects. There's no private sector proponent. Well, why is there no private sector proponent? Because the regulatory environment is such that no one in the right mind would do this. I mean, TransCanada was just down doing the rounds. Francois Poirier was on CNBC. He was on Fox Business. He was talking to the Wall Street Journal. He's the CEO of TC Energy. Why was he down in New York? Touting their $8.5 billion investment south of the border. They're not investing near that in Canada. Why? The regulatory environment. So this is where government steps in. And I think Premier Smith did a good move in saying, we'll do the planning, the preparatory work. Sounds like she wants to go along a similar route to Northern Gateway, maybe some changes along the way. They'll study it. They'll see. That's a good idea. What I don't like is David Eby turning around and acting like he's his own sovereign country and saying, hell no, you won't get a pipeline through our land. We don't like pipelines and we want a pristine coast and you're going to just dirty it up.
Yeah, we just finished playing all of those clips. I got a kick out of a few things. Number one, as you know, because you called me a hippie my whole life, I'm from Vancouver Island. So I get the West Coast. It's not pristine. It is a busy, teeming port coast, okay? There is stuff that is shipped out of the ports off of the West Coast every hour of every day. So this notion that it's somehow some strange Eden that only has whales and otters in it, that's just a myth. It's a fantasy. That's not true.
Are you going to tell me that Lake Ontario is pristine and Hamilton shouldn't have ships coming in and out of it to deliver iron ore and take products to and from market? I think some environmentalists would try and claim that, but I drive over the Skyway Bridge on a regular basis. I see those big ships and I smile because that means jobs.
Yeah, and it means money and it means a real economy and prosperity. I want to shift to Ontario in a second, but first I want to get your hunch on this because Smith just made a big chess move here. She even called it, this is a test. This is a test of your nation building office there, Prime Minister Carney. What do you think he's going to do?
I'm not sure. And when he announced the major projects list a couple of weeks back, I had just been on stage in Calgary with Premier Smith, and she'd made it clear that the number one priority for her and her government was a pipeline to the northwest coast of Canada. I want to stress that it's the northwest coast of Canada, not British Columbia. Yes, it's in British Columbia, but that is the northwest coast of Canada. We are a nation. We are a country. We have a confederation for a reason. She said that was her number one priority. And okay, interesting. A few days later, the major projects list comes out. No oil pipeline on it. Yeah, okay, we'll double the LNG Canada project. That's good. Mm-hmm. I appreciate everything that's on the list, even if I think it's too tepid, not strong enough. These are good projects. I'd back every one of them. But she said to Albertans, have patience. And I thought, okay, does she know something we don't? And, like a lot of people wondered, did she have a special deal with Prime Minister Carney? Did he tell her, don't worry, you're on the second list that comes on Grey Cup Sunday or by Grey Cup Sunday, because everything is being delivered by a sports deadline with the new government, it seems. And I think she was already planning what we're seeing. This will be a test. If they do the planning and they can show, look, we have buy-in from Indigenous groups. And I know some are coming out already and saying, oh, no, we won't buy it. Northern Gateway had buy-in from every Indigenous group along the route. There were people within those communities who didn't like it, but that's like saying, well, you're planning a highway and, well, there's some opposition because Bob doesn't like that it goes near his land. Well, Bob isn't the whole community and Bob doesn't get to decide everything. And it's the same with Indigenous groups. Just because you are Indigenous doesn't mean you as an individual get a veto. And we have to get over that, especially folks in the media that like to prop up that idea. So she is doing something that will force the major projects office to sit up and take notice. I've spoken to people who know Dawn Farrell, who's leading the major projects office. They say they have faith in her. I don't know her. I've heard from others who say, watch out, she's not as advertised. Again, I don't know her. But smart business people I know say she understands the industry. So if Premier Smith can bring forward something that is credible, this will put to the test this major projects office. And Mark Carney, I think, has to start using his political capital to say to people like David Eby, calm down. We are a country, and you're either in the country or you're out. But everyone talks about Alberta separatism. Sounds like BC doesn't want to be part of the country and wants to block things going through. How about Alberta starts putting blockades on the highways and says, no, you can't ship anything east from British Columbia. Once it hits the BC Alberta border, that's it. It stops. We don't want your trucks. That would not be seen as a good move. That would be seen as hostile. That would be seen as bad for the economy and utterly ridiculous. So is his move to say no to this. Carney needs to stand up on this, and I think the Major Projects Office needs to take Premier Smith's proposal seriously.
I wanted to shift quickly to more of your neck of the woods, and I can't stand reading headlines like this. I saw that there is going to be a huge amount of layoffs in Oshawa again. So all I can think about is the families who are losing a massive breadwinner job there, the upheaval, like it's awful. And now a lot of that production, or at least that shift work, will go to the United States. What kind of headlines, what kind of news is that making in Ontario? And do you think this could have been avoided? Is it just Trump, tariffs, or is it also things like industrial carbon taxes and the strangulation of the things we were just talking about?
It's primarily Trump and tariff driven. If we were in a better space in terms of being a place to invest, maybe they could have dealt with that. But we're not in a good space as a place to invest. The Business Council of Canada has put out their budget proposals. They're calling for changes to the regulatory environment. Having the EV mandate, it's still there. It's just on pause. It hasn't even been done away with. It's still there. It's been done away with in the United States. You've got the clean fuel standards. You've got the industrial carbon tax. You've got, a less favorable regulatory regime happening in this country. Canada's industrial policy has always been to be a better place to invest in the United States, to have lower taxes, to have a lighter regulatory touch so that we can attract investment. It takes a lot to get a company to say, yeah, I'll build north of the border and then ship south of the border. So over successive Liberal and Conservative governments, we've done that for more than a century. And then Trudeau came in and literally was trying to strangle every industry with regulatory changes, with tax increases. And we're no longer a good place to invest. And so I think that it's not as big as the tariffs, but if we were a better spot, maybe they could have withstood that. Losing the jobs in Oshawa, that plant was shut down for a couple of years. I think it was 2018. They announced that it was going to be idled. And a lot of people in the business, and I'll give credit to labor and Jerry Diaz, who's now persona non grata everywhere. I'll give credit to Jerry. He worked hard to bring back production at the Oshawa plant after it had been completely shut down. So it was always a bit tenuous. This is a big blow for Oshawa. It's a big blow for manufacturing in Ontario. And I worry it won't be the last. Mark Carney was elected promising he could get a deal with Trump. I know Trump. I know how to handle Trump. I can get to deal with Trump. Well, none of those things have come true. And in fact, tariffs are worse than they were during the election. And during the election, what did he say? Well, you had to elect him because President Trump wants to break us so America can own us. Tariffs have only gone up. They've increased on which products they're on. And what does Mark Carney say now? We've got the best deal of any country in the world.
Yeah.
And he's off talking to Mexico and not trying to get a deal with Washington. There haven't been real talks between Ottawa and Washington since the end of August. And here we are. It's the beginning of October. All these things hurt those workers in Washington. Elections have consequences. Political actions have consequences. And dithering has consequences.
Brutal. I can't believe they haven't been talking to the United States since August. That is pathetic. I wanted to cheer up a little bit because I saw a really stupid idea and I wanted to get your response to it. There was a group, I honestly can't remember the name of the group, but it was basically what I would say kind of a non-governmental organization that's there in Toronto. And I think it mostly kind of comes up with kind of urbanite, like blue sky, trial balloony type ideas in Toronto. And it was making the rounds on the interwebs the other day. And they're like, hey, congestion pricing, as they call it, where you actually, charge a fee to every single driver for the great honor of driving in a downtown core of a city.
Yeah.
Let's do that. So I usually liken this to a digital toll wall. They were so close to doing this in Toronto, rather in Vancouver. It was crazy. They were going to charge like $8 per crossing over every single bridge going into the downtown of Vancouver. They were going to start charging people using license plate reading cameras. They were going to set up all over the place in Vancouver. You know, A, people don't have money to burn in Vancouver. It's one of the least affordable places to live. B, there are some zealots who just detest vehicles, who can't stand cars. It's one of the craziest things. And so I wanted to get your thoughts on this because they came so close to doing this in Vancouver, and all of the people who hate cars in Vancouver, who are on Vancouver City Council, they thought it was a great idea. Let's start punishing drivers. Let's start charging them $8 or $6 every time they go past a photo camera. I wanted to get your thoughts on this because we see it in London. I can't believe people still live in that place. It would be so expensive. We've seen pushes for congestion charging in New York. Do you think this is something that would fly in Toronto?
Oh, first off, please stop hurting my ears. There is no second T in Toronto. Okay.
Sorry.
There's no second T ever. Never has been. This is never
Great divide here.
This is never going to fly in Toronto.
Toronto.
Mayor Chow would probably love this. There's a number of, left-wing, nearly communist councillors like Gord Perks who would love this and would back it and have probably even advocated for it. But it's never going to fly, not with the residents, and more importantly, not with Ontario Premier Doug Ford, who, unless something changes, will be Premier for life here because he has the worst opposition going. And I know all kinds of people in the audience are going to be saying, he's a Liberal. He's still conservative enough to say no to this. He's taking out the speed cameras that were put in, which were allowed to go into, they were supposed to be for school zones, and it was supposed to be limited in use. And then, of course, some of the cameras were collecting millions of dollars a year, issuing tens of thousands of tickets for one camera, which of course means it's not about slowing people down. It's about a cash grab. So he's ordered the cities, get rid of this. You're not doing this. You're not doing a cash grab. He's already gotten rid of the toll roads on Highway 412 and 418. These were two highway expansions that the Wynne Liberals, perhaps it goes back to Dalton McGuinty, but the Liberals had put in previously and made them toll roads. He got rid of that. He's gotten rid of the tolls on the portion of the Highway 407 that the province owns. But I hadn't heard of this story. And so I looked it up, and my colleague Joe Warmington wrote about it about a week ago for the Toronto Sun.
Oh, great.
And it's a group called Build Toronto.
Okay.
And they say Toronto is paying the price of gridlock, commuters waste time in traffic, and businesses lose billions in productivity. Congestion pricing will get Toronto moving again. I've never heard of Build Toronto, and their idea can go in the circular bin. Like that, this is trash. You're right, though. London has it, but let me warn you about another idea that I only discovered last year visiting family in Glasgow. They don't only have congestion pricing, they have green pricing. And so at one point we wanted to go downtown, staying at my uncle's house. My uncle could not drive me downtown. Do you know why?
Why?
His car's too old. Now,
What?
He is 76, 77 years old. He's not going to be buying a brand new car. His car is in good repair. But they base it on the age, and they say if your car is above a certain age, it's putting out too many greenhouse gas emissions. Only green cars are allowed in the downtown of Glasgow, and apparently many other cities across the United Kingdom, across once Great Britain. And so if your car isn't green enough, you can't drive it downtown. And then eventually you won't be able to drive it anywhere. So that's the sort of bad idea that we've got to watch for. It's not just congestion pricing anymore. It will be green pricing. This will be like the car version of trying to take away your gas stove or your gas fireplace or your gas barbecue, which is a push that municipalities across North America have been on, and that the Biden administration, when they were still in, was looking at doing that sort of thing. These horrible ideas, they just fester and move around and repackage themselves. But congestion pricing isn't going to happen in Toronto. Lefties have been talking about it forever, and thankfully right now we have a government that will say no. If Kathleen Wynne were still here, I'm sure she would be entertaining the idea and talking about it as a revenue tool.
Gross. That Glasgow story is awful. You know, I can't help but point out, I remember when you and I were watching Glenn Beck together a lot, like 12 years ago or so, and all of this was being warned about. Every single little bit of it. And we came this close to having it in Vancouver, impoverishing people even more, punishing them for daring to have a car. And you're telling me that in Glasgow, if your car is out, older, a certain age, you're not allowed to drive it downtown? Wow.
You are not allowed, and you will be penalized and fined. And let me just point out something else. Over this past weekend in Toronto, we had traffic nightmare. I know some people will think Toronto's always a traffic nightmare. That place is a hellhole. I get the emails, I get the tweets, I get it. But we had last Saturday, within the span of a few hours, we had the Blue Jays host 42,000 people at a great game where they helped clinch their playoff position. We had the Toronto Maple Leafs playing against the Montreal Canadiens in a preseason game that still drew about 19,000 people.
I saw the fights. Those were quite some fighting majors. Yeah.
We had Toronto FC draw 25,000 people to BMO Stadium to watch Toronto FC play Lionel Messi with Inter Miami. And we had about 17,000 people roughly at Budweiser Stage for a big music event. More than 100,000 people in a small area. What happened? The subway kept shutting down. Streetcars were down. And they stopped the commuter rail system, which is called GO Train around here. They shut it down. So all these people that would normally take transit, you want us to take transit and get out of our cars, you've got to actually make sure the transit is there. And this was a planned shutdown of that train system when they knew that there were 4 massive events. And all those venues that I mentioned, they're purposely built along the transit system so that you can get people in and out of the city. So, don't tell me to get on the train, which I use all the time, but don't tell me to get on the train if the train's not going to be there. We'll just use congestion pricing and everyone can go on the train. Not if it's not running.
Oh my gosh. Brian, outstanding coverage as always. Thank you so much for your time. Once again, folks, if you've got your podcast thing going on like I do in the weekends when I'm trying to defragment, be sure to tune in to Brian's full comment and read his articles in the Toronto Sun. Thanks so much, man.
Thank you.
Once again, that is Brian Lilley. He's the senior columnist for the Toronto Sun newspaper chain. He's lived all through Ontario, lived in Quebec. He's covered Parliament Hill. He's covered Queen's Park. And as you can hear, he's got a really good read on Western Canada. So definitely tune in to what Brian is having to say and his analysis so that you can understand what's going on. So let's understand a little bit more of what is going on. And I wanted to focus on Toronto, but again, this does not stop in Toronto. This does not stop things like this in Ontario. It spreads across Canada, folks, because some dumb idea that is tried, like I mentioned, in Vancouver or floated like a cute little trial balloon in Toronto, these municipal politicians, they all talk to each other. Like they all talk to each other and they literally gather together in summits at least once a year, probably twice. It's basically like summer camp, but for city politicians, and you get to pay for it. And they all get to become BFFs all the time. And then they exchange horrible ideas like, let's ban natural gas furnaces in people's private homes. Let's charge people more parking based on how big or old or new their vehicle is. That's something they tried in Vancouver. These sort of dumb ideas, they spread and they seep into smaller cities. So if you're in Brandon or you're in Moose Jaw or you're in Red Deer, these sort of things do come home to roost. So it's super important to pay attention. What is going on with Ontario Premier Doug Ford and getting rid of those photo cameras? Let's find out. Joining me now is Noah Jarvis, the Ontario Director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Audience members might recognize Noah from True North and Juno. Yeah, sorry, the CTF stole him because he's just that good. Noah, thanks for joining the show today.
Thanks for having me on. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, Kris.
This is kind of fun. We're kind of like, I feel like I'm talking back through a different echo tunnel or something. So it's super fun to have you on as Ontario Director. I had to get you on the show to talk about Ontario Premier Doug Ford, the good and the bad. And right off the top, I will say that we do have a fun animation because Ontario Premier Doug Ford does tend to be a populist, but who goes whichever way the wind is blowing. So we made up this fun animation. It's of a weather vane. There we go. And I thought that it was fun to make this animation because a lot of us will say, oh, well, you know, Doug Ford's a weather vane or blah, 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 blah. And then it dawned on me, I don't know how many people know what weather vanes are. Like, that's an old term. So what you saw there was they're things, they're like metal kind of four-directional things that typically sit on the top of a barn, and they turn whichever way the wind is blowing, and they show you which way the wind is coming from. That's super important to know, okay, when you're working on the farm, if you're trying to pull in a harvest, if you're trying to, you know, burn some shrubs, right? Something like that. So I just thought that was funny, and I wanted to poke a little bit of fun at Doug Ford. But let's start with the good things. He is getting rid of photo radar. Why was this becoming a problem, and why did he get rid of it?
Well, just firstly on Ford going back and forth. I mean, we praise him when he does something great, and we, don't when he doesn't. That's just how we operate at the CTF. But when it comes to the speed cameras, I mean, the Ford government had initially brought in the policy that allowed municipalities to install these speed cameras back in 2019. And since these municipalities were granted this power, they have basically exploited this program. They have installed speed cameras, not just in school zones or in other places where it would be expected that drivers take extra precaution to slow down, but they ended up just installing the cameras all throughout their cities and really using the cameras as a cash grab. Premier Ford even recognized that these cameras were a cash grab, and thus he moved to ban municipalities from installing and using these cameras in the way that they have. But what we have to recognize is that Ford, like the weather vane, as he is portrayed in that great animation, he blows one way on one day and blows and goes with the wind in a different direction on another. In 2019, he thought it was politically expedient to bring in these speed cameras, and now in 2025, he recognizes that these cameras are unpopular and are thus scrapping them. So we thank him for getting rid of these cameras, but I think he needs to make sure that his priorities are always in line with saving taxpayers' monies instead of trying to exploit them and grab their cash at every possible moment.
I wanted to continue with the good stuff. What about the gas taxes? Where are you guys right now with Ontario provincial gas taxes?
Yeah, so we don't exactly have the lowest gas taxes in the country. I believe that the title belongs to either Alberta or Saskatchewan. So congrats, keep doing what you're doing out there out west. But in Ontario, we received a significant cut in our gas taxes a couple years ago, where Premier Ford reduced the tax for gasoline from 14.7 cents a liter down to 9 cents a liter, making Ontario's gas tax one of the lowest in the country. And a few months ago, he extended the gas tax cut for Ontario drivers. And this is really saving Ontario drivers a significant amount of money. If you own a pickup truck like a Ford F-150, for example, every time you go to the pump to fill up, you're going to be saving $7.75, almost $8 at the pump every time you go to fill up your tank. If you drive a minivan, like say a Honda Odyssey, in a year, you're probably going to save about $219 at the pump. Those are significant savings that families can put to other necessities like clothing or food, or even just planning a family vacation, which you can take an extra day because you have the little extra change in your pocket from those savings for the gas tax cut. So it is great that Premier Ford recognizes the need for gas taxes to come down, and also in line with his continued opposition to a carbon tax. But there are other areas where Premier Ford could be cutting taxes, and he's just not.
Okay, so let's get into that really quick here. Where does Ford need improvement? You mentioned carbon taxes. I don't know if this is on your list, but I'm going to throw it on there real quick. He needs to stand up to Mark Carney's industrial carbon tax out loud with his face and his actions. He needs to say, do not do this. So I don't know if that's on your list of stuff, but where does Ford need to pull his grades up?
Well, it's a very long list, and
Okay.
that definitely made the list. He needs to stand up to Carney, not just on opposing the industrial carbon tax. He was very happy to oppose the cap and trade system in Ontario and
Yep.
oppose the consumer carbon tax. You know, if you remember the Maclean's magazine, where he's standing with all the different premiers and claiming to be the resistance. But when Carney comes into office, he's clearly hasn't been resisting the industrial carbon tax, which really hits Ontario's auto industry, steel industry, all of the industrial products that are made in Ontario. They are being hit by the industrial carbon tax. But he also needs to oppose Mark Carney's EV mandate. You saw Premier Ford make some tepid comments about how the EV mandate needs to go. But Premier Ford could take solid action in joining a legal fight that Alberta had started in opposing the EV mandate, claiming that the mandate's unconstitutional. Yet Premier Ford hasn't joined in on the fight. And it's not just Premier Ford, but other premiers need to join in on that fight and support Alberta in making that argument. But to stay with Ontario, Premier Ford, he says a lot of good things. He says that he opposes the EV mandate, doesn't actually put in the work to oppose the mandate. But he also made a lot of promises in 2018 that he did not follow through on. A lot of tax cut promises, but not a lot of tax cuts, let's just say. He promised to cut the income tax for the second tax bracket by 20%. That has not manifested. He promised to cut taxes for businesses, small businesses. Those tax cuts haven't manifested itself. He said that he would significantly reduce or even eliminate income taxes for minimum wage earners, and that has not happened. So
The heck, man? Why? What is he? Okay, that's making me mad. Okay.
Well, when you get into government, you kind of realize that you like being able to throw money around, spend on this and that, try and create an industry or revive an industry that you think is going to boost your political prospects or be popular with some segment or another. But the harder, more principled decision is to actually follow through on those promises, to cut spending, cut taxes so that you're able to deliver those savings to taxpayers. But instead, he is continuing on with the McGuinty-Wynne era of tax and spend policy.
Yeah, it's the McGuinty-Wynne kind of tax and spend. Folks, it shouldn't matter if it's a guy in a blue tie or a lady in a red dress. Spending is spending. Last I checked, Noah, it was costing Ontario taxpayers like $300 million a week on the debt interest payments. Put another way, so a house is about $1 million in like the Greater Toronto area. I know that sounds crazy, but give or take, let's say a really fancy house is about $1 million in the area, just for average. Burn down 300 houses every single week. That's the value of the interest charges, last I checked, that Ontario taxpayers are paying on the debt. And Premier Ford has got to do some serious work on his budget to be able to start fighting that debt. I've got about 30 seconds left. What's your last point that you want Ford to work on here?
Well, he needs to follow through on his 2018 promises of getting Ontario's finances back in control and actually being able to deliver tax cuts to Ontarians. We are running a $14.6 billion deficit. That means that the government's borrowing $14.6 billion that taxpayers are going to have to pay back through taxes. We are currently, as you mentioned, paying Bay Street bondholders $1.35 billion every month on interest charges. You said that's like burning down 300 houses. That's like not being able to build 27 secondary schools. That's the cost of 27 secondary schools that are not being built because we're giving that money to bondholders on Bay Street. So Ford needs to recommit to a lot of his promises he made in 2018, control spending, and actually deliver tax cuts for Ontarians.
Noah Jarvis, Ontario Director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Kris.
Folks, this is why you have to go to Juno News and subscribe to Juno News, okay? Because we can get great guests like this. We can get great analysis like this. I wanted to take a moment to thank Candice Malcolm for letting the Canadian Taxpayers Federation sit in her chair while she's away. We really appreciate this opportunity to reach the audience, to reach the listeners of Juno News. Folks, this is where you're going to get deep dives like this. This is where you're going to get holding politicians to account, because at the end of the day, they're going to try to take more of your money. They're going to try to control your lives. Remember what we just told you about an idea of a toll wall around Toronto, okay? And they're going to try to strangle industry. So make sure that you go to Juno News, subscribe to Juno News to support independent media, independent journalism. I gotta say really quick, as a longtime journalist, it is so important for people to subscribe to independent journalism, because unfortunately right now, most of the mainstream media is now on government payroll. That is not journalism, okay? Journalists must not be paid by the government. In order for us to be able to hold government to account, we can't be counting on government for our paycheck. That is the opposite of a free press. So make sure you support a free press here in Canada by subscribing to independent newsrooms that you want to watch. And also, be sure to like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and share this info with people who need to know.